Charlie Morgan in the Telegraph is on the line. Charlie, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So, the way we view it is that the Heineken Cup was a great tournament, and then the English clubs decided they weren't winning it enough, so they kind of balanced it or rebalanced it a little bit so that they would win a bit more. And lo and behold, it hasn't worked out the way they wanted. What's going on?
And the English clubs got what they deserved this weekend. So, yeah. Look, it's been a really sobering weekend, I think, for the Premiership clubs, and without kind of wishing to be too dramatic about it, you certainly look at the Munster and the Leinster games. I heard you guys talking about the breakdown in the Munster game. I'm sure we'll get onto it later on. It really reminded me of England going over to Dublin for the Grand Slam with a Grand Slam attempt last year, and the way that they lost was very much kind of a dearth of intelligence and adaptability, and that I think if you kind of spread it out into the national team, that it has been a fairly concerning weekend when you look at it that way as well.
Because we were trying to see if, like, is it a hangover from the November internationals, or then Exeter don't really have enough players playing in that test squad for that to have had such a dramatic impact. The Saracens game, was that just a bit of French anger, revenge, or like is there a reason why it happened so collectively to so many of the English teams last weekend?
I'm not sure. That's what the question we've kind of been trying to ask over this side this week. I don't think so. I think it's probably kind of a combination of factors. Starting with how much the Premiership takes out of these teams, going through to a little bit of a Lions hangover potentially, but also the fact that a lot of the teams that are made up in these 7 that are in the Champions Cup have had difficult starts to the season anyway. You look at Quins, just totally outthought in the snow by Ulster. Saints were absolutely nowhere against Ospreys. And then, like I say, the other two, I thought were really kind of real triumphs of tactics, of aggression, and of intelligence for Leinster and Munster, certainly. And in those two games, certainly, you just hold your hands up and say that they were just far too good, far too adaptable, far too clinical. And there's little you can do about that other than react this week.
Is that case that I was making, that the game is refereed slightly differently in the Premiership? And, because traditionally, say in football, there would have been we need to change our style of football for European games because they're technically superior footballer that we're up against. Like, that was never really the case in rugby. You kind of put your best foot forward, you played your style of play because that was your identity, and you enforced your game plan on the opposition. Is there any sense that the Premiership is trying to be sexed up a little bit by the refereeing and game flow, and that you do have to adapt a bit more when it comes to these European matches?
I think it changes week to week. You'll see games in the Premiership where you'll have, say, Wayne Barnes refereeing, who's referees, one of the best in the world. He's involved in those test matches, and he doesn't mind a scrap at the breakdown. What it should be worrying and potentially will be concerning to Eddie Jones is exactly the point that Alan made earlier that I heard while I was offline, is that there's got to be an autonomy with the players on the field to adapt to that. You take the example of the Munster game. Peter O'Monion was not only kind of scrapping in and around the ruck, he was right on top of Jerome Garces, making sure that, breaks in play, making sure that he was on top of those interpretations, and that's such a huge part of the game. You look at Leicester, they were they just looked shell-shocked, and there was kind of a little bit of kind of petulance even on the field. Forget what was said afterwards. There's a little bit of petulance on the field as to how they were reacting too, and that just that starts off a vicious cycle that's just so negative and isn't going to get you anywhere in the games where they're really tight.
So it kind of sounds a bit like there's a cultural issue at the moment in English rugby, that the players aren't being asked to think on their feet, that they're being pre-programmed to play a certain style of way, a certain style of play, and actually that leads to those circumstances, particularly in knockout rugby or in the massive games where your opposition have been given the freedom to think on their feet.
A cultural issue might be too far, but it's certainly something that Eddie Jones wants more leaders. He wants to build leaders in and around Dylan Hartley. And these games really kind of accentuate the importance of that and the importance of adaptability, which is another one of his watchwords. And after an underwhelming, to be honest, 3 wins, but still fairly underwhelming autumn, ironically, especially at the breakdown, it's kind of another kind of another reason that'll be something that he'll want to turn around before the Six Nations.
It's funny because we didn't want to overreact to the small sample size of one weekend of Champions Cup games, but equally you're kind of implicating it in a slightly longer period of time of not the level of stratospheric brilliance that we would have seen from Eddie Jones' England for the first two Six Nations campaigns.
I think, again, it's dangerous to overreact again, slightly small sample size, as you say, but it's certainly kind of brought to bear a lot of the issues that Eddie Jones has been looking to fix.
Charlie, it's Alan here.
Hi, Alan.
Do you think that I agree in a sense that I'm always nervous because I had this feeling as a player when you win one of these games, you got to go, oh God, Jesus, it can change so quickly. Do you think it'll change this week? Because, I look at the Bats could have won against Toulon. Quinn's probably, they're out of the competition now. What will their approach be? But I think the big ones are obviously Exeter coming to Dublin and Munster going to Welford Road. Do you think we'll see a flip of these results this weekend?
I think Exeter will be better. I think they will be slicker. The Leinster performance was phenomenal. How they Exeter thrive off cycling through possessions, getting into their shape, and Leinster just completely starved them of the ball. In that 20 minutes where they had 2 tries disallowed, Exeter weren't able to get anything going. I think another thing, and this kind of may seem completely trivial. It's about playing the conditions as well. It's freezing at Sandy Park as the rain started coming down, and that seemed to kind of make the Exeter struggle slightly more. There were a few kind of handling errors at the back when Jack Nowell went to fullback. I think they'll have to start, if they get into their shape early on at the Aviva. I think it'll be a great game, and I think they can take it close. Leicester will have a lot of personnel changes. They're going to have to obviously switch things up at fullbacks. Talk of Manu Tuilagi coming back. Matt Tamua is the man for them if he comes back. Their whole back line dynamic shifts, and there's just a hell of a lot more direction to the way they play. And they've had the Wallaby hooker Tatafu Pelota now registered this week, so that gives them a bit more, cut and thrust up front, and makes them a little bit more savvy around the breakdown, which is obviously going to be a really important battleground again.
Charlie, Gordon Darcy was writing in the Irish Times over here yesterday about test experience when you're playing in European rugby, and he says that the likes of Johnny Sexton and Peter O'Mahony and the likes, they thrive in this environment because it's not as suffocating as a test match, but it's not at the lower pitch of, say, a Pro 14 match or a Top 14 match or anything like that. So he feels that the Champions Cup level is perfect for a test player who's used to the suffocating environment of the Six Nations because they don't have as much pressure and their skill set can come out in full force. So taking that into account, is it as simple as that, just to break down the Exeter performance into the fact that they don't have as much test experience as Leinster, they don't have the world-class talents that Leinster do, and they can't just handle the suffocating environment of a Champions Cup fixture as well? Yeah,
it's a totally fair point to make. You look at the two guys you mentioned there, Johnny Sexton, Peter O'Mahony, obviously really influential. Johnny Sexton made a ferocious counter ruck in the middle of that big Exeter pick and go sequence. You just thought, wow, that's kind of not what you expect from tens, but it was an example of real opportunism, aggression. 2 more guys that would kind of validate that point. Tyke Furlong, I thought, was phenomenal for Leinster, and Scott Fardy as well, real hardened kind of grizzled Test international, again absolutely to the fore in that big kind of pivotal momentum, emotion swinging pick and go sequence. I think it's a total fair point to make. Exeter, young side, lots of promising players who will go on to get past 50 caps. I'm sure likes of Harry Williams had a tough night, but he's going to be Dan Cole's understudy and looking to usurp Dan Cole fairly soon at tight head. They're the kind of guys that will grow into that. Henry Slade as well. But for now, you could really see them kind of maybe feeling slightly claustrophobic in that atmosphere, whereas the other guys that you mentioned really thrived.
Yeah, I know we weren't supposed to talk about Saracens, but just what happened during the week was so interesting. What is their response going to likely be this weekend?
It was funny, we did a piece last week when they got turned over by Harlequins looking at the little fixes that were going wrong in their pretty poor run of Premiership form, and we sort of all agreed that they won't be pressing the panic button. They're tiny little fixes. It's just that the odd pass is going to floor, the odd breakdown decision isn't going their way, and then there was that capitulation that was kind of based on their defence, which has been what they've set their stall out. Their whole resurgence, their whole rise to these titles has come off the back of really cohesive defence, and it just went missing. And somebody made the point that I saw that they're a very process-driven team, and maybe that the postponement affected them more than Clermont. I think, to be honest, they'd lost a few games by 1 or 2 points, and you look at Mark McCall afterwards. He was dumbfounded. He thought, he said his exact words were, "I didn't see that coming." Clermont were phenomenal. It reminded me a lot, actually, of the semi-final in Lyon last year, where they blew Leinster away, and Leinster managed to get that try, where Saracens were pushing just on half time and didn't score after, I think, Will Skelton got turned over. They didn't manage to get that score that would have taken them into half time with a view to turning things around in the second half. Leinster did, and then took that semi-final really close and could have easily nicked it. Saracens didn't get that score, and then you can't legislate for somebody like Raka doing what he did. He was just immense. So there was a comedy of errors. It was a bit of an implosion, but they'll regather, they'll regroup, and if they get anything from Clermont, you'd expect them to qualify for the knockouts, and they're a horrible away quarter-final to get.
Charlie, great stuff. Great to have you with us. Thanks a million for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Charlie Morgan of the Telegraph, giving us the thoughts from across the channel there.